3 Lives 3 Worlds, 10 Miles of Peach Blossoms. By Tangqi Gongzi. Translated by Hamster 428. Chapter 10. Yehoah's actions are surely not going to leave behind good karma for his descendants. We're no longer in King Kaiu. I don't have to miserably follow him on his strolls anymore, so it's perfectly reasonable for me to stay in bed for an extra hour. Why does he still wake me up? The skirt from yesterday isn't so wrinkly. I'm also too lazy to change, so I just sit up on my bed and cover my mouth as I yawn. Yehoah seems awake and lively. He smoothly puts his robe on and sits in front of the mirror to tell me, "Good, come here to comb my hair and put it in a bun for me." Surprised, I ask, "You're talking to me?" He holds the wooden comb in his hair. Migu says you're pretty good at fixing hair. Honestly, I am good at styling hair. There isn't any maid at the fox cave and fourth brother doesn't know anything about hair, so it all came down to me. Aside from the normal ones, I can also do other braiding styles when fourth brother wants to go visit Shi Li Tao Hua. Jian has always praised me each time he sees a new one. On the other hand, Yehoah hasn't bun his hair up ever since he came to stay at King Kaiu. He's only tied it back with a short silk ribbon in the simplest way possible. He smiles and hands me the wooden comb. I have to come see Tianjun today. It's not good if I don't dress properly. Yehoah has very beautiful hair, soft and shiny, long and black. I have an easy time combing it, but I ran into a little difficulty when I tried to bun it. There's only a jade hairpin and a jade headpiece on the vanity. After locking in his bun with the hairpin, I top it off with the headpiece. It's been a while, but my skills are still impressive. Yehoah smiles to me through the bronze mirror. I check and feel that this hairstyle has made him look even more handsome and regal, so there isn't anything else to fix. Satisfied, I place the comb back on the vanity. Yehoah's reflection still smiles within the mirror. My right hand, which is placing the comb down, is held back by him. He quietly says, "Before you." There's something different in his eyes, vast and vague like ripples across a quiet pond. Don't tell me his ill thoughts are switched on at this moment. He unhurriedly pulls my sleeve up to reveal my unadorned wrist. He softly smiles and takes from his own sleeve a bracelet. I recognize that it's a pearl bracelet to ward off evil. He stands up and tells me, "You should wear this bracelet for now. There shouldn't be any grave danger in the mortal realm, but life is hard to predict. It's best to be cautious." He softly touches my cheek and say, "I'm leaving." I thought back over all the things Yehoah and I had been busy discussing the night before, but not one presented itself as this important matter he had just mentioned. I decided to disregard it for the time being and think about what he had said after instead. He really had come up with an ingenious method. Only someone removed from the situation could view it with such clarity. I had been dithering about for so long now that all I was doing was making myself more confused. Thinking of a solution to this big concern made me feel as if a huge rock that had been pressing down on my body for weeks had been lifted. I felt weightless and infinitely more relaxed. I ran my fingers along the leaves of the mimosa plant in the pot on the windowsill, feeling light as a feather. I sat down and drank another cup of tea, still feeling light as a feather. I had only finished half the cup when I remembered the thing that had occurred to me as I had been drifting off. It was a really dreadful thought. According to mystic Gorge, Fengju had gone to the mortal world to repay her debt of gratitude. All I knew was that some mortal had done her a favor, which she had gone to the mortal world to repay, an explanation I had accepted without giving it another thought. Thinking it over more carefully, I realized that in all her 30,000 years, Fengju had owed a favor to only one person, and that was Dong Hua. His immortal magic was much more powerful than hers, which made it difficult for her to repay him. Could she have come to the mortal world to find Dong Hua in his reincarnated form and repay the debt that way? It had taken so much for her to make a clean break from her destructive love for Dong Hua. A few days of fussing over him could easily reignite those feelings. For the sake of second brother and second sister-in-law I had to act. I jumped to my feet, changed my clothes, and ran out into the courtyard. I needed to go see Yuan Zhen, the disciple who zapped 3 years of my spiritual energy each time we met, and ask him whether a young woman had arrived at the palace half a year ago with a phoenix feather birthmark on her forehead. Fengju's mother was from the Red Fox clan. After she and my brother had married, I was expecting the birth of a mottled little half-red, half-white fox cub. Instead, after 3 years of pregnancy, she gave birth to an exquisitely adorable little fox cub as red as pigeon blood with 1 white circle on her ear and 4 white paws. When she was a year old, she transformed into human form with a phoenix feather birthmark on her forehead. It was a beautiful birthmark, but it made changing form difficult for her, because whichever human form she took, this birthmark was always visible. Second brother was rather lazy, and due to this phoenix feather birthmark and the fact that she was born in August, the 9th month, he gave her the rather unimaginative name Fengju. Yuan Zhen had impeccable timing, and before I had even left the courtyard to find him, there he was striding toward me, 2 scriptures in his hands. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Master," he greeted with reverence. Yuan Zhen was an inquisitive boy, and I was not able to just come out and ask about Fengju. I considered it for a moment before pulling him over to a stone bench and sitting down. Yuan Zhen gave a cough and said, "What's wrong with your neck, master? It looks as if." My hand flew to my neck, but I felt nothing. He pulled a mirror from his sleeve and handed it to me, and I saw a red mark, as if a mosquito had bitten me. What gall that mosquito had, daring to suck the blood of a goddess! What luck that mosquito had too! 1 suck of my blood would provide him with thousands of years of cultivated spiritual energy, enough to transform him into a mosquito spirit probably. I nodded and sighed in admiration. "You noticed this small, insignificant red mark? And I've heard that you are so kind you won't even tread on an ant. These are extremely good traits." Yuan Zhen turned red in the face. "What do you mean?" he said, looking at me. "Well," I said, "in order to stop yourself treading on ants as you walk down the road, you need both a kind heart and a careful mind. A kind heart and a careful mind together make an integral whole." Yuan Zhen stood up so that he could pay full attention to the information I was relaying. I stroked my chin, and in a wise voice I said, "Taoism gives rise to 1 being, 1 being gives rise to 2, 2 beings give rise to 3, and 3 to thousands and thousands of beings. These thousands of beings have originated from nothing, and the process is complicated and delicate. Studying Taoism is a complicated and delicate process too. As your current master, I wish to examine your awareness of the complex and delicate nature of the world. Please go ahead, Master, Yuan Zhen said solemnly. Matching his solemn tone I said, before you turned 16, you lived in the Taoist temple, and after you turned 16, you moved to the imperial palace. It is not my intention to vex you with difficult questions, so I will just ask a couple of things, one about the temple and one about the palace. Yuan Zhen pricked up his ears. In the temple where you lived, there was a nun who always wore white, I said. This nun had a duster she used a lot. What kind of wood was the duster handle made of? He thought about it a long time, but could not recall. It was just a nonsense question I had concocted on the spot, so of course he could not answer it. With feigned composure I continued, since you are unable to answer that, I have another question. You must listen carefully and consider what I am asking fully. There's a woman in this imperial palace with a birthmark the shape of a phoenix feather on her forehead. What is her name, her ranking, and in which palace does she live? He contemplated it a while before saying, Master, your question about the temple has highlighted my ignorance, but your question about the woman with the phoenix feather birthmark I can answer. It is Honorable Concubine Chen, who lives in Lotus Bud Courtyard. Honorable Concubine Chen never actually used to have this phoenix feather on her forehead, but last December she fell into the lotus pond and was taken seriously ill. Her medicine wasn't working, and for a while it looked like she might not make it. But then suddenly she recovered. Since then she has had this phoenix feather marking on her forehead. A couple of the other honorable concubines asked a Taoist master to examine the marking, and he claimed that it was a goblin marking. My father, the emperor, didn't believe it, but he's been keeping his distance from her since then anyway. I was right. Fengzhu had come after Dong Hua. I was impressed that this Taoist master could tell it was a goblin marking. Yuan Zhen looked at me anxiously. It's not easy to cultivate such close attention to detail, I said with a nod. You have the rare gift of a meticulous and attentive mind, which is the foundation of Taoist practice. But you need to cultivate further attentiveness. You can leave now. Rest from your scriptures today. Go away and think about your attitude toward Taoist study. Yuan Zhen wandered off forlornly, his head drooped, a sight that made me feel very bad. Yuan Zhen did not need to be any more attentive than he was already. I watched him stumble off and then called over a serving girl and asked her to lead me to Honorable Concubine Chen's Lotus Bud Courtyard. As Fengzhu's King Kaihu family, we appreciated that she owed Dong Hua this favor, and as her aunts and uncles, we saw it as our debt too. Nevertheless, today I was going to try my best to convince Fengzhu to go back to King Kaihu. The courtyard I was staying in was a prestigious one, as it was not far from the emperor's back palace. I had rushed straight there without thinking to write a note announcing my visit, but seeing a servant girl on duty in the main courtyard, I reported my visit to her instead. Not long after, a waiting girl led me inside. There was a pavilion inside where a round-faced girl was feeding fish. Apart from the phoenix feather shape on her forehead, she was unremarkable in her appearance. This was Fengzhu in her mortal form. I gave a sigh. Fengzhu, the Bai clan's only granddaughter, had been such a free spirit. It was distressing to see her in such a desolate place, demeaning herself by feeding Dong Hua's fish. She heard my sigh and looked up from the fish. Fengzhu, your Aunt Bai has come to see you, I said, my voice filled with disappointment and frustration. She had been in the mortal world on her own for half a year now and had obviously been feeling very cut off and lonely. Hearing me call her name, she felt overcome with sorrow and rushed toward my arms. I opened them wide for her. Squealing, she rushed straight past me and to the serving girl who had led me in, and it was this girl who received her crushing hug. I was not sure whether to continue to hold my arms open or not. Her whole face was contorted in panic. She was crying and desperately shaking her head, saying, "No, Aunt Bai, don't take me back with you. I love him and I can't be without him. No one can keep us apart, no one." I was so shocked by her reaction that I took a step back. This could not be the little red fox from our clan, surely? Fengju could be a silly girl at times, but she was always composed and had never been known to cry and fuss in this way. Even when she felt upset by her feelings for Dong Hua, she rarely let it show, choosing to drown her sorrows in Zheyan's wine instead. Seeing her in front of me now, clinging to her serving girl and wailing to high heaven, I felt so shocked I could not speak. All I could do was shake my head. Seeing me shake my head only made her cry harder. Aunt Bai, please have mercy. Please don't stand in my way. I'll do anything you ask, but please don't stand in the way of what I've come here to do. The serving girl in her arms was trembling like a leaf in the wind. I felt the corners of my mouth twitching. Fengju suddenly squatted down, clutching at the front of her robe. Her serving girl leaped up into the air as if she had been stung and ran off yelling, "My mistress is vomiting up blood again. You, quickly go and tell the emperor. You, hurry and fetch a handkerchief. You, rush and fetch a wash basin." I covered my mouth to give a cough. "Come on, calm down. If you carry on vomiting blood, you'll choke. I'll leave you now if that will make you feel better. See, I am going now." I found the serving girl who had led me here standing at the side of the courtyard with her mouth agape, and we both took our hasty leave. The whole way back to Purple Bamboo Garden, I thought about how unlike Fengju Honorable Concubine Chen's emotional behavior had been. But she did have that phoenix feather marking on her forehead, and she had recognized me as her aunt straight away. As an immortal, all Fengju needed was to borrow a mortal body to live in the mortal world. She should not be affected by the emotions of the mortal whose body it had been. It seemed almost as if. No, but it couldn't be. I stroked my forehead as I thought. She wouldn't have used the 2 lives incantation on herself, would she? Not when it was forbidden in King Kaiu. There was nothing inherently wicked about the 2 lives incantation. All it did was allow you to change your personality for a certain amount of time. Sometimes young immortals doing business in the marketplace in King Kaiu performed the 2 lives incantation on themselves. Under its spell, it would not matter how many difficult customers they had to deal with. All they would have for them was looks of heartfelt sincerity and smiles as splendid as chrysanthemums. There were never any unpleasant exchanges or fights. But it was obviously not an honest magic, and it violated the immortal code of conduct. Later Fourth Brother and I agreed to forbid it. But why would Fengju have performed this incantation on herself? I spent a long time trying to work it out, but it failed to make any sense. I took a nap that afternoon, planning to return to Lotus Bud Courtyard in the evening. Fengju was considerate enough to save me the journey. I had a table set up in the back courtyard and was sitting out there eating dinner on my own. There were few stars, and the moon was bright, and with such a thick growth of bamboo, it felt like being in a lush forest. I had been enjoying my meal in these picturesque surroundings when all of a sudden she appeared on the courtyard wall, covered in bramble branches. She jumped over, landing on my dining table, and all the crockery smashed to the floor. I quickly leaped out the way, rescuing my cup. She climbed up miserably from under the table and straightened the crooked bramble branches on her body. She knelt down in front of me in a great show of etiquette. "And by, your unworthy niece has brought you brambles as a sign of penance. I know that I have done wrong, and I am very sorry." I wiped a couple of drops of oil from my sleeve. She had left Honorable Concubine Chen's body and for the time being was back to her usual appearance, which was much easier on the eyes. "It appears that you've performed the 2 lives incantation on yourself," I said. Her face went red. She gave an admiring sigh and told me how wise I was. I wanted to help her up to her feet, but when I saw all the oil on her body glistening in the moonlight, I changed my mind and just lifted a hand, instructing her to rise while I went over to the stone bench to sit down. I took a sip of tea from the teacup I had rescued. "I can understand why you've come here to repay Dong Hua's debt of kindness, but why did you need to perform the forbidden 2 lives incantation on yourself?" I asked with a frown. Fengju's mouth immediately opened out into a wide circle. "And by, how do you know that I've come to repay my debt to Emperor Dong Hua?" Si Ming the Star Prince said that Emperor Dong Hua's mortal reincarnation was top secret, and only a few people in the whole of the 4 seas and 8 deserts knew. I took a leisurely sip of tea and remained silent, trying to look mysterious. She started to tremble violently. "And by, all this concern and interest in Dong Hua, you haven't fallen in love with him, have you?" She wrung her hands in sorrow. "Emperor Dong Hua is more attractive than the Northern Sea Emperor, his magic is more sophisticated, and he is a more suitable age for you, but you must know, Dong Hua's heart is made of stone. If you've fallen in love with him, you have a very bleak future ahead." I looked up at the moon. "4th brother will be back from the western mountains soon," I said casually. "He was the one to forbid the 2 lives incantation." One unthinking King Kaiu Immortal thought the ban was just for show and continued to use the incantation regardless, and 4th brother ended up banishing him from our kingdom. Fengju jumped straight up from the stone bench, and supporting herself on the bundle of bramble branches, she cupped her hands together and bowed down toward me with reverence. "When I was a serving girl in Dong Hua's residence, I did a favor for Si Ming the Star Prince. Si Ming was very grateful to me, and when he discovered that Dong Hua wished to be reborn as a mortal, he arranged for an immortal disciple to let me know as a way to repay his favor. I have been feeling so unworthy. Dong Hua saved my life so long ago, and I still haven't repaid him. When I found out he had asked to be reincarnated as a mortal, I knew it was my chance to repay him. I entered his dream when he was 14 in his mortal form and asked him whether he had any unfulfilled wishes or desires. And what did stone-hearted Dong Hua say to that?" I interjected. "It couldn't have been that he wished neither for riches, honor, nor land, just to find someone to love." "And by, how are you so wise?" Fengju asked in astonishment. I snorted my tea out of my nose. Could Dong Hua have really become so So trite? Fengju dabbed away the tea I had sprayed onto her face and continued bashfully. During his mortal life, the emperor has experienced some very fickle women. So in the dream he asked me to pair him up with someone who would love him wholeheartedly and never leave or abandon him. So you decided to match him up with yourself. I mused. Fengju gave a nod and then shook her head. Matching him with me would be meaningless. I Ming the Star Prince went through Donghua's destiny for this life. He is not fated to meet a woman who will truly love him. Instead, on the 1st of lunar June, at age 37, he will meet the girl of his dreams at the Vedic Dharma festival. Sadly, this girl will fall in love with his son, Prince Yuan Zhen. I may have come to repay my debt to Donghua, but I can't rewrite his fate in the process. As it happened, half a year ago, one of his honorable concubines reached the end of her predestined life. After thinking about it long and hard, I decided to borrow her body and offer him true love. Before the emperor's love calamity befell him, I wanted to fulfill his desire by giving him a brief taste of how it feels to be truly loved. By the time the woman he is destined to fall in love with appears, I would have accomplished my mission and would be free to go, not having altered his fate in any way. I lowered my head and sighed. Have you not been tormented enough by that man? Have you not suffered enough heartbreak? Now he wishes to find someone to fall in love with. If he'd had this desire when he was an immortal, with your infatuation you'd have fully repaid your debt by now. You're right, Aunt Bai, Fengju said in dismay. At first I thought that I'd found a way. I was infatuated by the emperor for over 2,000 years, and even though I eventually fell out of love with him, I didn't think it would be hard to rekindle some of that former feeling. But how enigmatic true love is. It can't just be brought out on demand. I spent a long time preparing myself, but when I borrowed Honorable Concubine Chen's body and went to see the emperor, I didn't feel even a glimmer of affection for him. I couldn't even find it in myself to say a few kind words. I felt awful to have let him down. Dying embers are hard to reignite, and past love's hard to rekindle, I comforted. You mustn't blame yourself. But I have made this journey down to the mortal world now, she said, sounding grave. I have incurred a large debt to the keeper of the netherworld for keeping Honorable Concubine Chen's body fresh for me and stop it from rotting. Giving up without having repaid my favor to Donghua would be like suffering a double loss. I thought about it long and hard for a couple of days. She paused. And I decided I had no choice but to perform the 2 lives incantation on myself. I spend the days bound by this magic, acting in accordance with Honorable Concubine Chen's former personality, which allows me to adore the emperor. It is only after the sun has set that I am released and return to my old self. I had no idea what Honorable Concubine Chen had been like when she was alive. Each night when I recall what happened during the day, I feel extremely anguished and ashamed. You mustn't brood over this and feel ashamed, I told her against my better judgment. Suddenly I thought of something important. You haven't taken advantage of Donghua since turning into noblewoman Chen, have you? She looked shocked. Honorable Concubine Chen wasn't very favored at the best of times. After I took over her body, this birthmark appeared on her forehead, and that bastard Taoist master told them all that it was a goblin marking. Although the emperor didn't leave me completely out in the cold, he hasn't come to Lotus Bud Court to visit me since then either. Well, "What's the point of acting like you're so in love with him then?" I asked in surprise. Truly loving someone requires absolute dedication. I can't simply love him when I see him and stop loving him when we're apart. I yawned. Seeing Fengju back to her usual calm self made me start to feel a whole lot better. If she could repay her debt smoothly and without a hitch, her uncles and I could stop worrying about her. It was all going to be fine. I thought it through carefully and was just about to tell Fengju to go back to her palace, clean off all the oil, and get ready for bed when an immortal wind started to bluster and propitious vapors to appear. Jian suddenly appeared in midair, looking rather worn out, which was rare to see. He could not have angered fourth brother again, could he? I drained my tea without batting an eyelid. Sure enough, the first thing he said was, "Young lady, has your fourth brother come to see you recently?" I shook my head. "Isn't he still in the western mountains, looking for Bai Fang?" I asked. "He's been back a few days now," Jian said with an awkward smile. He put a hand to his forehead. Bai Fang really was feisty and hard to tame. He was just about to go off when he thought of something else. He turned to me and said, "There's something I forgot to tell you. The day after you went to the Eastern Sea banquet, the Sky Emperor's grandson, Yehua, came to the peach grove, looking for you. He was asking about something you'd done 300 years ago." "Oh," I said in astonishment. "I told him that 500 years ago you were taken seriously ill and slept for 200 years straight," he said with a frown. "He left after that without asking anything else." "Young lady, you haven't had another marriage engagement fall through, have you?" That hard-fought battle I had waged against Qingking was naturally not something that could be shared with outsiders. King Kaihu had not been enemies with Qingking, and as a King Kaihu goddess, I had no justification to attack him. I muttered to myself for a while before saying, "No, I don't think so. I haven't seen any sign that Yehua might want to call off our engagement." "Well, that's good," he said with a nod. Then he leaned toward Fengju and said, "Fourth brother really misses your cooking. Please come to the peach grove when you are free." "I'm too busy," Fengju said, shaking her head. Jian looked at her and said, "Your 2 lives incantation worked very well," before disappearing. "And Bai, he's threatening me," Fengju said, looking very upset. It would be difficult to find anyone in the mortal world who was both able and willing to push the emperor into the water in front of a crowd. Everything was set to help Yuan Zhen pass his calamity. I was just missing this critical component, someone to push the emperor. I had thought Fengju might be the right person to take on this huge burden. She thought it through very carefully before saying, "Being bound by the 2 lives incantation, I forget who I really am during the day. I think that I have always been Honorable Concubine Chen and have her personality. I spend my days adoring the Emperor so much all I can do is cry and vomit up blood. Bound by this magic, there is no way I would be able to push the Emperor into the water. In fact, the way Honorable Concubine Chen is, you should be praying that she doesn't ruin your plan by stopping whoever you find to push him." What she was saying made complete sense, and I did not force the issue. If I could not find anyone else, I would have to be the one to push him. But the emperor had never been fond of Taoists, and I was not sure if I would even be allowed onto the same boat with him. Luckily, Yuan Zhen had a mother who doted on him with heart and soul, and not just his mortal mother in the temple. Although the one in the temple worried about him, most of her heart was devoted to questions of immortality, and mundane earthly matters were often overlooked. The mother who doted on him and also concerned herself with these mundane earthly matters was his immortal mother, Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian had come down to the mortal world to see how Yuan Zhen was and how preparations were going to help him through his impending calamity. When I saw her, I asked her to take on the monumental responsibility of pushing the emperor overboard. My idea was a logical one. When the time came, she could use immortal magic to make herself invisible. When the predestined beautiful woman appeared and everybody was focused on her, Xiao Xian could stand behind the emperor and give him a light shove, toppling him over into the water. But there was a hitch to this plan too. She would be using immortal magic to change Yuan Zhen's destiny, and since Xiao Xian was pregnant, it would not be right to ask this of her. If she did suffer her own magic backbite, it was likely to impact her unborn baby. My eyes dropped to Xiao Xian's bulging belly, and I muttered, "It would be dangerous for you to take this on. We need someone sturdier." After thinking it through, Xiao Xian suggested getting her husband, Tangqi, to do the dirty deed. End of chapter 10.